And Kafka says, and I'm kind of generally quoting, so some of the words may not be exact. He says, a book should be like an axe to shatter the frozen sea that is inside us. So, all right, so maybe we have to have a splinter of ice in ourselves as we are writing the book, but when the book is written, it should be the axe that shatters the frozen sea in us. It should arouse that much compassion in us, and that's the book I want to write.
Just connected question, I thought I'll jump in because how painful it is to write a story, because you have to go under the skin of the character, and if the character is going through the pain, physiologically, do you feel the pain?
The question is, if the character is suffering and you're writing a story about that character, how do you feel? Do you feel that? Yes, you do. You know, when I write my characters, I have to intensely imagine them. I have to really put myself in that place, and I have to just feel everything that character might be feeling and think everything I think that character is thinking in their heads, and feel all of their frustration, perhaps all of their fear, all of those things. It is very difficult. Sometimes after I write an intense scene, I find that I'm really kind of shaken up, and I have to like go for a walk or something to clear my head. I have to do something like that. So yeah, it is. Sometimes, you know, I do find myself getting very emotional if I'm writing an emotional scene. I remember when I was writing Palace of Illusions, and I was writing the scene when Draupadi is being disrobed in court, and she's crying out to everyone to help her. I remember I was getting really very upset by that whole thing, because I was just imagining how it must have been for her, who had been in such a position of power and had so much respect, and now she's dragged into the court, and even though her husbands are sitting there, no one will help her. So yes, absolutely. I think we have to experience that. If I don't experience it when I'm writing it, how will you experience it when you read it?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Well, mid-80s, when I was a student of English literature, we grew up sort of in the company of all Lawrence and Dickens and Hardy and Grant, you mentioned. We found a different kind of a narrative style which evolved, and we grew up learning that. Now, as a teacher, when I'm supposed to teach narratology and narrative theory, at times
all those people that you grew up with studying, and the very contemporary writers who are writing. You know, and that is a complex question, because there are many differences and many similarities. You know, on a human level, I think on the feeling level, we feel a lot of the same things. But I think the modern narrative is much more fragmented. Okay? The older narrative, someone like Dickens, comes out of a very clear idea of a world in which this is good, this is bad, and the character goes through these experiences. We know exactly what the character is going through. If you've read David Copperfield, we go through his life, we learn along with him, and the narrator is basically, the hero is a good character. He makes mistakes, but he's a good character, and we're sympathetic with him. So things are clear-cut. This is good, this is bad, this is the way to behave, this is what happens when you behave otherwise. There is a moral universe that makes logical sense in much of that older world. I think after the Second World War particularly, in art as well as in literature, people lost that certainty. Who was the enemy? Today this person is the enemy. Tomorrow the person who was the ally has become the enemy. You know, people who we looked up to protect us are engaged in acts of atrocity against us. So the world order became much more fragmented. The amount of violence that was seen, the scale of violence increased so much that people lost that certainty. And therefore the modern narrative is fragmented and doesn't make that kind of complete sense. The reader has to put together the pieces and come up with their own answers. And the reader has to decide, if there is good in this universe, where is that good situated? The hero is not necessarily a good person. The hero can sometimes be very troubling. And we see that in like Nabokov's Lolita, for example, or even more recently, The White Tiger, right? Books like that. The hero is very problematic. the story is told in a problematic way. Sometimes, like in Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury, it's told by so many narrators, we don't even understand how they relate to each other until the very end. And maybe not even then. Right? So that, I think, is a major difference. And if you look at art, if you can see, and I'm not an art historian, so this is just from a layperson's point of view, where like the Renaissance paintings, everything was in its place, it was reflective of a moral universe. But if you look at something like Picasso's Guernica, right, everything is exploded. You can't tell, what is this? You have to look at it 10 times. Is this an animal? Is this a woman? Like that. I think, modern literature is therefore sometimes difficult to read. People get frustrated. My students come to me and say, what is this? And then I have to say, the modern writer wants you to, the world has exploded. The only way to live in this world is for you as the reader to put the pieces back together in a way that makes sense to you.
Ma'am, my name is Dhruv, and at times still can't find the explicit relationship between anything that's happening and the dream. So what I'm trying to ask is, can anything like this actually give you an inspiration to write, or can they give you some direction towards what you might be thinking of or what you can write?
Yes, I think definitely. Sometimes you get great story ideas and dreams if you can remember them after you've woken up. But yes, I think so. And sometimes it's wonderful because you are kind of outside the dream, but obviously you are the creator of the dream. So on some level you've created that story, right? That story that you're dreaming, you have created it. Now you just have to take it and remember it and write it down. And of course add to it as necessary, because sometimes, dreams have that strange, lack of logic, right? Where some things will make sense and some things won't. And then you have to add in what the dream is lacking.
Have you ever got any kind of dream?
Yes, actually I have. It's very strange. I'm sure there's some kind of psychological explanation. When I was writing my novel, Queen of Dreams, in which one of the main characters is a dream interpreter, right? So if you are having certain dreams, let's say, that keep coming back, the dream that is like an obsession, right? So you can go to her and say, this is the dream I'm having, and she can analyze. She has the power to kind of analyze it and see if there's a real significance, all right? So as I was writing about the dreams of all these people who are coming to the dream interpreter, I started having all of these, very strange dreams. And I was like, oh, and now I need an interpreter to go to myself. But very interestingly, once I finished writing that novel, it was like that part of my brain shut off and I didn't have dreams like that anymore.
Thank you.
We'll take one final question, and since Chitradi has always been a very good teacher, and she's very amazed that now I have students. So let it be a student question. Okay, I'm sorry, Mukta, maybe after this.
Okay, two. We can take one student question
and one faculty question.
One faculty
one student
question.
Writing that piece of composition. So while writing, simultaneously you get an idea for writing a future composition also, and you preserve that, and how you possibly convert it into another piece of writing after this is completed.
Right. That does happen to me. Writer's notebook, which stays on my desk. So whenever I have a new idea, I'll write it in the writer's notebook. And I write down as many details about that idea that I have in my mind. And then it'll stay there, right? So if I think again about it and I have some more ideas, I'll continue writing. So I'm working on my main manuscript, but the notebook is there for any further ideas. And this is something I really do recommend to writers, because that way you don't lose your ideas. Otherwise, sometimes we have wonderful ideas and we know they'll make a good book, but by the time we come to them again, we've forgotten them. So a writer's notebook has been very helpful for me.
So whenever you're stuck, probably you can go back and...
Absolutely. Therefore, at the end of a project, I'm never stuck, because I have 3 or 4 ideas, and I go to them, and then I try to feel them. Which one do I understand best? Which one can I feel most intensely in my imagination? And I'll choose that one to write. There's a hand way in the back. Is that a student?
Yes.
Okay.
And please, perhaps somebody who writes plays.
Ansari. I'm Dr. Shamda's student. And my question is, this talk is termed as a journey of a writer. But a journey cannot be made without some setbacks. There must have been in this journey some setbacks where you were cornered, where you had to face the wall. So how did you come out of it? What was the inspiration? How did you inspire yourself, motivate yourself? Can you share some of those incidents with us?
Sure. Well, one of the repeated challenging moments is when you get writer's block, right? You're writing, you have this great idea, you get to this point in the story, and then you just don't know what's going to happen next. You have no clue about, you created this wonderful problem for your characters, but now you don't know how to get them out of there, right? So that's a major challenge, the writer's block. And I think, you just have to keep working your way through it. That's when, again, the writer's notebook is useful. You jot down ideas, you try one thing, you try another thing, you keep writing regularly. Sometimes when I get writer's block, I go and read the writers that have inspired me, and sometimes that will give me ideas to write. Or sometimes when I get really bad writer's block, I have a shelf in my study full of books that are really terrible, and then I read some of them, and then that gives me a lot of confidence. It's like, if those people could finish those books and get them published, hey, I can do it too.
We'll take one final question, and it's from Mukta.
Hi, I realize I got the last question, so I'm sorry to end on a low note. When I was in the States, I was talking to a woman who worked with women who had suffered domestic violence. And she said one of her big problems was women realized that they'd been violated, but they did not want others to think of them as battered women, quote unquote battered women. And that was one of her major challenges, is to get a woman to leave her husband, knowing full well that she had been violated. These women were mostly black and white women, and most of them had protective families. They went back to their mothers. Do we see this kind of shame at being a victim also among South Asian women?
Definitely. And that is something so ironic, isn't it? And that's something I've written about in some of the stories in arranged marriage. There's a story called First Snow, where a woman is a victim of a racist attack, but after the attack, in addition to feeling angry, she feels so ashamed that someone did that to her. It's as if it's her fault, when obviously it isn't. And I think victims in domestic violence situations often feel that way. And that's why it's important to have the counseling and to sit down with them and to work it through with them, to ask them questions like, but why do you feel like that? Do you see that something bad was done to you? You did not really cause it to happen? And I think, that's you have to work through it psychologically. You have to be really, really patient with women in that situation, because it also comes out of a long history in communities, not just our communities, but often many communities where a woman who's a victim is made to feel ashamed. Oh, you must have done something, otherwise why would he have done something to you, right? And we have to patiently and with love work through those old mental habits and get the woman to get back, stand on her own feet and start a new life. But thank you for that question. And thank you for all of your wonderful questions. I really enjoyed speaking to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chitra. May I now request Professor Jain to kindly give her a little memento from IIT Gandhinagar. Please, Professor Jain, please.
Last night I was asking her, are you a graduate of Presidency College? And the answer was yes. If you look at Presidency College, so many great people they have produced. I would like IIT Gandhinagar to produce some great, not only engineers and scientists, but also literature people. And she's our first PhD scholar in literature. So may I request Diti to do the honors, please. Thank you, Diti. Thank you very much, and we will go downstairs for a cup of tea, and she will be available for book signing ceremony. Thank you.